A simple man saved a lady from sinking sand. Unaware she was a billionaire CEO, he changed her life immediately. The morning felt both ordinary and strange. Jason Miller, a man in his early 40s with sun-hardened hands and a calm, thoughtful face, had lived in the same modest cottage on the edge of a sleepy town deep in the Texas countryside for nearly 2 decades. That morning, like many others, he woke before the sun, brewed a pot of coffee and stepped out onto his creaky porch. The sky was still soft with dawn, a blend of peach and pale blue. He sipped his coffee slowly, then pulled on his boots and set out on his usual morning walk, a ritual he kept to clear his mind before the day's work began. The wooded trails behind his property twisted along the edge of a dried-up creek bed, once fed by spring rains. It had been a dry year, and though the underbrush was thick, the ground crunched beneath his feet. Jason carried a small backpack, just water, a pocket knife, some rope, and a flashlight, though he rarely used them. But something felt different that morning. As he followed the trail deeper into the brush, a strange stillness fell over the land. Even the birds had quieted. Jason paused. The hairs on his arms stood up. Then suddenly, a scream. High-pitched. Frantic. Female. It came from somewhere up ahead, sharp and desperate, slicing through the trees like a warning bell. Jason didn't hesitate. He took off running, heart pounding, dodging low branches and pushing through thick shrubs. He didn't know what he was running toward, but instinct had already taken over. Less than a minute later he saw her. A woman, mid-30s, blonde hair soaked and plastered to her face, mud up to her waist, was sinking fast in a patch of marsh he hadn't seen in years. It was hidden just beyond a bend in the trail, covered in tall grass and fed by an underground spring that still hadn't dried up. She was flailing, panic in her eyes. Her designer blazer clung to her body. One heel was long gone. Jason dropped his pack, hit the ground flat, and reached out. "Don't move too much," he shouted. "I've got you. Just hold on." She was gasping, struggling to stay afloat in the heavy muck. Every movement dragged her deeper. Jason reached for the straps in his bag and quickly tied them into a makeshift rope. Bracing his feet against the base of a nearby tree, he threw the strap toward her. "Grab it. Wrap it around your arm." She did, barely holding on. Jason pulled, inch by inch, his boots digging into the dirt. The resistance was brutal, like hauling cement. Her eyes met his, wide, terrified but also trusting. Finally, with one last desperate yank, she came free from the sucking mud and tumbled forward, collapsing onto solid ground. They both lay there for a moment, breathless, covered in mud and sweat, surrounded by silence. She coughed and turned to him, her voice trembling. "You saved my life?" Jason sat up, checking to see if she was injured. "You all right? Anything broken?" She shook her head slowly. "No, just shaken." Jason helped her sit against a tree. He offered her water from his bottle and wiped mud from her forehead with a rag from his pocket. She looked like someone from another world. Her jacket was clearly expensive, her nails perfectly manicured, her smartwatch blinking with missed notifications. She didn't belong out here. "What were you doing out here alone?" he finally asked. She hesitated, catching her breath. "I took a drive to clear my head. Thought I could hike a little. The GPS stopped working. I must have wandered off the trail." Jason gave a small nod, still puzzled. "You're lucky I came through when I did. That patch can suck a person down faster than you'd think." She gave a soft, disbelieving laugh. "Yeah, lucky." They sat in silence for a moment, the adrenaline slowly fading. Jason stood, offered her his hand, and helped her up. She was covered in mud from head to toe but still held a quiet poise. "I'm Jason," he said. "Claire," she replied, brushing mud from her hair. He didn't recognize the name and she didn't offer a last one. Jason led her back to the trail, walking slowly so she could regain her strength. She asked him simple questions. If he lived nearby, what he did for a living, how often he hiked these woods. He answered modestly, not realizing she was studying him just as closely. And just like that, the quiet life of Jason Miller had been cracked open. Jason guided Claire carefully through the underbrush, offering his arm for support. She was still shaky, mud-streaked and trembling, but upright. Her designer blazer hung heavy on her shoulders, soaked and clinging. She walked without saying much, occasionally stealing glances at Jason, this quiet, broad-shouldered man who had come out of nowhere and pulled her from death. About 15 minutes later, they reached a narrow stream that cut through the woods, its water clear and shallow, gliding over smooth stones. Jason had used it for years to wash up after working outside or hunting. Without saying a word, he knelt beside it, cupped his hands and splashed water on his face, letting the coolness chase away the sweat and shock. Claire hesitated. "You can use it," he said gently. "It's clean. I've been drinking from it for 20 years, and I haven't grown a tail yet." She gave him a weak, grateful smile and knelt by the stream. Her hands dipped into the water and she gasped at the chill, then began cleaning her face. She scrubbed at her arms, her neck, doing her best to regain composure. Jason turned away to give her privacy, pretending to adjust something in his pack. Neither of them noticed the silver smartwatch on her wrist begin to slide loose, its magnetic clasp weakened by mud. With one unconscious flick of her hand as she wiped her brow, it slipped. The small, sleek device dropped straight into the side pouch of Jason's unzipped backpack and vanished among the tools and rope. She exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she said after a pause. "You didn't have to help me, but you did. That's rare these days." Jason glanced at her and shrugged. "Would have been wrong to walk away." Claire smiled faintly but said nothing. Her eyes drifted down to the stream, thoughtful, for a woman who looked like she belonged in a marble-floored boardroom. She seemed strangely out of place, and alone. Jason cleared his throat. "You sure you're okay to keep walking? My place ain't far." "No," she said quickly, wiping her hands on what remained of her jacket. "Thank you really. I think I've got enough strength now. There's a road not far from where I parked, I can find it." Jason hesitated. He didn't want to leave her alone again, but something in her tone said she'd made up her mind. "Well, all right," he said. "But at least take some water with you." He pulled a bottle from his bag and handed it to her. She accepted it with both hands, their fingers brushing slightly. A moment passed. Something unspoken lingered between them, like the pause before a curtain falls. "Jason, right?" He nodded. "I won't forget this." Then she turned and walked away, vanishing slowly between the trees. Mud-streaked, proud and carrying secrets like shadows. Jason stood there a moment longer watching the spot where she disappeared. Then with a faint shake of his head he slung his backpack over his shoulder, turned back toward home, and let the mystery fade into the rustle of Texas leaves. Back at his cottage, Jason tossed the pack beside his workbench and headed for the kitchen. The day's heat had finally caught up to him. He stripped off his shirt, poured a glass of iced tea and stood by the screen door, watching the wind ripple across the fields. The woman's face lingered in his mind, her expensive clothes, her distant eyes, her careful silence. He didn't know her last name, didn't know where she came from. Jason didn't know why she'd been alone in that part of the woods. But somehow it didn't feel like an accident. People like her didn't just go hiking in muddy Texas backwoods. Still, he wasn't one to chase ghosts. He chalked it up to a strange morning and turned back to his tools, comforted by the familiar click of metal and oil. He had a tractor to finish by the weekend. Later that night, Jason sat in his shed going through the backpack. He pulled out the rope, his thermos, and then something cold and unfamiliar. He frowned and brought it closer to the light. It was a sleek, modern smartwatch, drenched in dried mud but still blinking faintly. He wiped the screen clean, revealing a small hairline scratch across one corner and a glowing message. "Connection lost." "Dang." Jason stared at it, puzzled. He didn't own any kind of smartwatch. Hell, he didn't even have voicemail set up. He tapped the screen. Claire Industries. A logo flickered, a stylized C wrapped around a globe. Jason blinked. He had no clue what that meant. Just as he reached to set the watch aside, the screen lit up again. Incoming alert. Tracking offline. Last pinged location. Unknown device. Jason frowned. Well, hell. He set the watch on his workbench and walked away from it. Technology had always made him uneasy. Things beeping and buzzing at random, tracking you, talking back. This thing felt like it belonged to another world. Meanwhile, back in the bustling city, Claire's mind raced. She sat at her sleek desk, fingers tapping away on her keyboard. The hum of the city outside her high-rise window felt like a distant world compared to the quiet chaos she had just lived through. The missing watch wasn't just a luxury accessory. It was a vital piece of technology that had recorded every important detail of the incident. The moment she sank into the mud, and the moment Jason reached out to pull her from nature's treacherous grip. But more than the footage, it held data. Data she couldn't afford to lose. She had spent hours trying to track the watch's location using the device's built-in tracker. Her fingers flew over the digital map, zooming in and out, following the blip on the screen that taunted her, close yet unreachable. Then finally a breakthrough. The signal led her to a small neighborhood far removed from the glitzy tower she called home. Her heart beat a little faster. A mix of excitement and a hint of apprehension. What had she gotten herself into? The SUV purred to a stop in front of a modest house, a sharp contrast to her opulent world. She stepped out, smoothing the folds of her designer clothes, a picture of elegance and confidence. She glanced at the small, unassuming house. It was nothing like the polished, luxurious spaces she was accustomed to. But it was Jason's world, a man who, in the blink of an eye, had changed her life. Claire adjusted her sunglasses and walked toward the front door, heels clicking softly on the cracked sidewalk. Through the window she could see Jason's faint silhouette standing still. When she knocked, the door opened slowly. There he was, Jason Miller, the man who had rescued her without knowing who she was. His expression was a mixture of surprise and uncertainty as his eyes landed on the stranger at his doorstep. He hadn't expected anyone, and certainly not someone like her. "Claire," she said, her voice calm yet assertive, extending a hand for him to shake. "Claire Donovan. You saved my life." Jason hesitated for a moment before taking her hand, his rough, calloused palm pressing against her perfectly manicured one. His eyebrows furrowed as he tried to reconcile the woman standing before him with the muddy, panicked figure he'd pulled from the marsh. She was so different from what he'd imagined, dressed in high-end clothes, exuding power and wealth. I didn't expect." He trailed off, clearly lost for words. Claire smiled softly, a hint of empathy in her eyes. "I know I'm not exactly who you thought I would be." She gestured to the SUV parked at the curb, then back to herself. "But I needed to find you. That watch you took, it's not just a watch. It recorded everything. The fall, the rescue." She paused, giving him a moment to absorb her words. "It's essential for me to get it back." Jason blinked, still processing. "Wait, what do you mean? It was just a watch. I didn't know it was important." Claire's gaze softened. "It's not just important. It's crucial to my work. The data it holds, I can't afford to lose it." Jason swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the situation. He hadn't known that the object he'd grabbed from the sand was more than just something shiny and expensive. Claire's tone shifted, a quiet intensity filling her words. "I'm here because I owe you my life, Jason. But I'm also here because I want to offer you something in return." She stepped closer, her voice steady but filled with purpose. "I have resources. I can help you build a better life than the one you have now. But only if you're willing to take that chance." Jason stood frozen, unsure of what to say. The offer hung in the air like both a promise and a question. Would he take it? Could he even comprehend the kind of life she was offering? It seemed too far from his grasp. Too foreign. Claire tilted her head slightly, watching him closely. "Think about it," she said softly. "I'm not asking for anything more than the chance to repay you." Jason took a deep breath, his mind spinning. What would this mean for him? For his future? He could hardly believe what was unfolding in front of him. For the first time in his life, the weight of a single decision felt incredibly heavy. And yet, it also felt like the beginning of something entirely new. Later that day, Jason sat in the worn-out armchair by the window of his small living room, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee mug as the morning sun filtered through the blinds. The world outside his humble home felt distant, like something that belonged to someone else. He lived in the same town he'd always known. And as far as he was concerned, his life was simple, predictable, and above all, manageable. His days consisted of working on old engines, fixing what was broken, and living quietly with his thoughts. There was comfort in the routine, in the small but steady rhythm of life. But everything changed the moment Claire Donovan walked through his door. It felt surreal, as though the world had shifted on its axis. He had never been around people like her, people who seemed to have everything. A life full of ambition, success, and wealth. And yet, she had walked into his life as if it were just another day. Her presence as commanding as the towering skyscrapers that dotted the skyline she called home. Despite the differences between them, there was something undeniably genuine about her. A warmth that had made him feel both seen and small at the same time. The memory of their first meeting still played in his mind like a vivid scene from a movie. He remembered her poised yet vulnerable expression, the way she had confessed that the watch he had found held data far beyond its luxurious shell. He could still see the sincerity in her eyes when she told him that he had saved her life, not just physically, but in a way that altered the course of her future. But what really lingered in his thoughts was her offer. She hadn't just thanked him for rescuing her. She hadn't come to simply express gratitude. No, she had seen something in him. Something more than the rough hands of a mechanic or the unkempt beard of a man who barely made ends meet. She had seen honesty. She had seen courage. And that courage had led Claire to extend an invitation Jason never could have imagined. That invitation was to her headquarters in the city, a place he had only seen in pictures, a world he had never ventured into. It felt like a dream, or a trap. But there he was, sitting in his quiet home, preparing himself for what felt like the biggest decision of his life. Claire had given him the details. But now, with her offer looming like a shadow, Jason found himself grappling with doubts he'd never faced before. A knock on the door shattered his thoughts. He stood up quickly, heart thumping as he walked to answer. Claire had kept her word. She had arrived just as she had promised. She stood on his doorstep, her presence commanding as ever, but now with an air of quiet anticipation surrounding her. She looked every bit the woman who owned everything and everyone, powerful, unapproachable. But in her eyes, Jason still saw that same warmth from their first meeting. "Jason," she said, her voice warm but direct. "Ready to come with me?" He hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the life he knew, the life of small-town comfort. The simplicity that allowed him to blend in, to not stand out. It was a life he had accepted, even if it hadn't always made him happy. But now, standing in front of this woman, the offer she had made seemed like something that could change everything. Jason stepped outside, locked the door behind him, and followed Claire to the waiting SUV. The vehicle gleamed in the sunlight, its sleek, futuristic design the polar opposite of his beat-up truck. As they drove in silence, the city slowly grew closer on the horizon. Jason could feel the tension rise in his chest. This wasn't just a change in scenery. It was the beginning of a completely new chapter. As they entered the heart of the city, Jason's eyes widened. The buildings towered above him like giants, their glass exteriors reflecting the sky in a dazzling display. He had never seen anything like it before. He had seen pictures, of course, but the reality of it all was overwhelming. The noise, the crowds, the hurried pace. It was all so different from the peaceful rhythm of his small town. But Claire didn't seem fazed by any of it. She navigated the chaos like it was second nature, her composure completely unshaken. Finally, they arrived at her headquarters, a massive building that seemed to touch the sky. The entrance was guarded. The lobby buzzed with activity. Jason felt like an intruder, like someone who had accidentally stepped into a world never meant for him. But Claire, sensing his discomfort, gave him a reassuring glance as she led him through the lobby and into a private elevator. When the doors opened on the top floor, Jason was stunned. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic sweep of the city that stretched as far as the eye could see. The office itself was sleek, modern, and minimalist. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed everything in golden light. Everything about it screamed wealth, power, precision. "Welcome to my world," Claire said with a soft smile, her tone laced with pride, and something else. Something warmer. She led him into a quiet conference room where a table was already set with coffee and pastries. Jason felt a pang of anxiety. He had never been in a room like this, let alone one where deals were made, where people in suits and dresses ran the world. Claire sat across from him, her posture relaxed, her hands folded neatly on the table. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said. "But I want you to understand something. I'm not offering you this job out of charity. I don't do charity." Her eyes locked with his. "I'm offering you this because I believe in you." Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I'm not sure I understand. I'm just a mechanic. I've never worked in a place like